Mark Mullinax, Power for the Peaceful. We're in verse 72 out of 81, a verse I'm calling CTRL-ALT-DEL.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
Messenger by Mary Oliver. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums. Here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing, since all the ingredients are here, which is gratitude, to be given a mind and a heart and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren, to the sleepy, dug-up clam, telling them all over and over how it is that we live forever.
Welcome back to our podcast, everybody. On tap today is a verse translators have not agreed 100% on how to approach. We'll get into its possible meaning soon, but first, let's see who my guest is today. Her name is Alala Linda, who's now approaching the mic to introduce herself in a few sentences.
Hello. Mark and I share an affinity for the work of John O'Donohue, the Irish mystic, poet, and philosopher. And one of the items in my curriculum vitae is that I was John's business manager when he died. And I managed his literary estate for 8 years following that. My calling is to be a satyagrahi. That's from a word coined by Gandhi he combined satya, meaning truth, and grahi, meaning grasp tightly. So my calling is to hold tight to truth as a guiding principle for living life.
That's a wonderful self-introduction. Well, Alala, let's get right into this. Could you please read our verse for us?
Verse 72, life without fear. Live without fear, and one's life path opens up for yet greater wonders. Do not constrict anyone's life or squeeze livelihoods. Appreciate and do not meddle, so weeds of weariness have no place to grow. Living without fear, sages live in wonder and self-awareness, not to self-magnify, but to live with care. They let go of the many to live in the one.
Thank you very much. Alala, I think you wanted to be on this podcast today, number 72. What is it in verse 72 that may have drawn you to be here today?
Currently, there's just so much invitation to live in and from fear. And I find fear a highly unreliable basis for decision-making and action. So this verse, its topic and what it had to say, really drew my attention.
Well, class, I hope you feel like you're in good hands with Alala. being in charge. Okay, as earlier hinted, not a great uniform agreement among interpreters about this verse, especially in how the first line should read, which I've translated thus: live without fear, and one's life path opens up for yet greater wonders. The interpretation of this line depends upon who we imagine is speaking here. If this line is to come out of a ruler's mouth, we might assume that translations that speak to a ruler ruling with fear are the correct wordings. But translations into English run the gamut. They are cryptic or even mystifying, like James Legge, one of the first translators of Tao Te Ching into English.
When the people do not fear what they ought to fear, that which is their great dread will come on them.
Or take D.C. Lau, a most respected translator in the early 1960s, who translated the same line thus:
When the people lack a proper sense of awe, then some awful visitation will descend upon them.
Well, we could put this another way. When people lack a proper sense of awe or vision, then some dreadful visitation will descend upon them, perhaps a flood, or maybe a military invasion, proving to the people that their fear was of the wrong kind, or they weren't scared enough. It's almost like the ruler sage had this agreement with nature, capital N nature, that he could manipulate nature as a rewards and punishment system. Other translators imply this great dread is none other than the ruler himself. See Ren Jiu here.
When the people do not fear the force of the ruler, something forceful and terrible would happen.
And that reminds me of how I was raised. Mark, if you start crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Still others play down the fear, like Muller's version. When the people do not fear your might, then your might has truly become great. And then there are other versions off in some twilight zone of intention of meaning, like David Bullen's. He said, the master's sense of wonder is constant, like a deja vu that never ends. What was he talking about? What's going on here? Why the disparity of interpretations and emphases? Well, according to Tao scholar D.C. Lau, at its beginning, the entire Tao Te Ching is to be understood to address the ruler and should be treated as advice for ruling. And I think D.C. Lau is correct. But things changed. Another scholar, Jonathan Starr, said this particular verse was especially taken by rulers as a directive not to oppress his subjects, quote, narrowing their sense of space, unquote. And Starr cites a 10th century Common Era or AD scholar named Su Che, who advised seeing this verse not as advice to rulers per se, but as advice to individuals, using body metaphors like weeds of weariness, livelihoods, and living in wonder and self-awareness, all suggesting that a person, not just a leader, not confine their own living space by limiting the identification of their self to their body, but rather open up their identification of self with others. The phrase I translated as livelihoods can refer to one's home and hearth, and even progeny. So this passage could mean, do not limit your heart, or do not withhold your love and humanity from others. Starr says it could also mean, do not limit your heart with conditional love. Love all people equally. In my translation, I intentionally used Su Che's tradition of interpretation for this verse, one that focuses more on the individual reader, like you and me, for it broadens the scope and task of this verse and suggests that Tao is not limited to some province of political authority, but is as useful for the private individual as Tao is for the ruler. Leadership is, after all, a personal path first. Political authority hinges on personal authority. To maintain one's personal authority and grounded in Tao, one's psychic center, your heart and mind, should not be constricted by or meddled with by foreign alien forces. So hence, authority happens in anyone who authors their own life. Could be anybody, a sage, a ruler, a common citizen. Historically, this newer interpretation arose within a Chinese worldview that then was populated with powers and deities of the universe and their spheres of influence. And people saw that the microcosm of their interior powers and authority was seen as a small yet equally powerful expression and symbol for exterior forces. Tao is equally present and just as alive in both. The point is, one's inner authority could affect the room or region in which you lived, just like a ruler's authority could affect a nation. The source of that authority is the same, Tao, and it does not matter if one is a politician or a farmer. My point: yes, this verse's original meaning is problematic. I know the risks of not translating this verse as original readers may have understood it. Readers can make up your own choice as you keep both in mind. And now, Alala, what do you think about all this that I've just said? Do you have anything that you'd like to add or correct?
I'm intrigued by the idea of not confining or constraining one's life. Fear constricts our field of view. It limits our ideas of what is possible. And John O'Donohue wrote about the realm of possibility, and if you're okay, I'd like to read some of that.
Please do.
Okay. This is from his article, Towards a Poetics of Possibility. There is a special world adjacent to us that we rarely consider. Without its presence, generosity, and passion, our actual world would be pale, numb, and empty. This world rarely draws attention to itself. It subsists in silence. Though the actual world owes it everything, it is never tempted to push it aside in order to emerge and claim the light for itself. Attention and exploration it never seems to encourage. Yet no thing, no form, no color, no animal, plant, no ocean, star, or human being could ever have emerged without the infinite fecundity, limitless creativity, and unbounded generosity of that world. This is the world of possibility. The world of possibility is silent, yet dense with the dreams of what could be. The world we normally inhabit is an abbreviated world, a world selected from that prior realm of plenitude. And he goes on, the facts of what we have lived stand out. We take them as given and real. Yet all these facts have issued from that huge adjacency of possibility, that neighboring world that shimmers invisibly behind all we take to be real. And then he says, normally, we never notice how the penumbral realm of possibility is actually the artistic milieu that offers us a subtle diversity in order to compose what we think, how we see and act, and informs the depth and extent of who we choose to become. So I take from this verse 72 the lesson: don't limit your realm of possibility to things that you fear.
I really do appreciate that. I loved his idea of a fecund world adjacent to ours. And there is, and I think I've been trying to get that exact wording now for 72 verses, and you just nailed it. That there's this wonderful place that's always adjacent to us, and we can choose to see it, embrace it, or neglect it.
Also, just freeing ourselves up. John talks in that article about not crystallizing into fact too soon. Yeah. And I think that's what fear encourages us to do, because fear wants us to know the fact and know how to react. And so that's the unique challenge that I think this verse actually is offering, is dwell in the realm of possibility and allow for fact, but find your dwelling place. inside that possibility rather than trying to firm things up and fight them.
Yeah, I think that when we do find our natural place in that fecund, how do you say it? Fecund world, then we develop consciousness. We develop faith. We develop confidence.
And we live in imaginative creativity.
Yeah. And every child I know needs parents like that.
I'll agree. I'll agree.
All right. We'll see you after the short break coming up.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
The next segment is a discussion about the way, or one way, that fear emerges in us when we diverge from Tao, that is, that fecund world just adjacent to us, and how there may be even a good fear. So let's begin. Like everyone else on the planet, but probably not any other species, we humans experience the challenge of two competing scenarios at the same time. We call one scenario what we think we should do, and the other scenario that we have to balance with the first is what we actually do. What we usually do is based on our histories and traditions and habits of mind and body and custom. So we usually do what we have usually done. In this strict sense, we are like all creatures, from one-celled to complex systemed mammals and birds. That is, we tend to follow remembered physical trails for food and water. We learn, even as babies, what works, and we keep on doing that. However, we human beings, even in the face of huge climate changes looming, still do things as we have always done, which is problematic. That is, we don't learn from new conditions, thinking perhaps that we are immune from their effects. We may see the disaster coming, but instead of feeling we should do something about it proactively, it is simply easier to remain loyal to the trail we've always used, which is what we, most of the time, do. It's called inertia.
George Orwell warns that we will be overcome by an externally imposed oppression. No big brother is required to deprive people of their autonomy, maturity, and history. As he saw it, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacities to think. Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death.
And what are some of these externally imposed oppressions? Well, you can name your own. I'm going to name phones, screens, AI, the expectations that violence is the number one way to react. Well, these are, let me count the oppressions. There are so many. Well, class, what we should do, however, is another matter. As conditions change, it is always optional that we change too. But do we? We know that we should not still build on floodplains, on low-lying beaches, and in fire-prone mountains. We still fight wars senselessly. So what we do is we do not interrupt or interrogate ourselves, but only continue to do the same old, same old. However, we continue this habit in ever new and always changing environments. Can we interrupt ourselves? Usually we do not. Witness the huge resistance to vaccines these days, the sheer number of people dying needlessly of preventable causes. We know the right things to do, but we often still do the traditional things that help get us to our current situations.
Interesting. It's so much more comfortable in the realm of the known. And this is a failure, I think, of imaginative creativity. And there's just so much more life in that realm of possibility. Mm-hmm. So Will and Ariel Durant say, the trouble with most people is that they think with their hopes or fears or wishes rather than with their minds.
Here is one way fear arises. In that space between what we should do and what we do, fear and anxiety grow. We live behind bars of tradition and conformity, leading to anxiety, nervousness, and unease. We may know what to do about that new pain or growth in our bodies, yet in our abiding refusal to listen to wisdom, we stay the course, trying to manipulate things from our imprisoned wills. We have had many such moments in our lifetimes, these moments of cognitive hesitation on what we should do and what we do. Well, between them, there's this psychic space where we hesitate. That feeling in the space between the should do and the do leads to unease in our psyches, or that four-letter F word, fear. If you want to give it a name, we mistrust and are at unease, and so we find and blame convenient enemies way too easily. We divide ourselves into tribes and camps and parties and listen only to them, which exacerbates the problem. For when we should be doing something new, we only repeat the old, hoping for different outcomes. And as you know, that is the popular definition of insanity. We want to make life as secure as we can, but we wind up repeating the paths to insecurity. In the space between what we should do and what we do, fear and anxiety just grow.
Those who see something to fear where there is nothing to fear, and see nothing to fear where there is something to fear, upholding false views, they go to states of woe. The Dhammapada, stanza 317.
Our rather dubious human superpower to damn their torpedoes full speed ahead means we steer clear of the very conditions that would save us or could calm us. Instead, we steer willy-nilly directly into the maw of looming catastrophes.
From Parker Palmer, fear drags us down. Fear of tomorrow, fear of each other, fear of life's diversity and vitality, its blooming and buzzing confusion. Today, we are surrounded by misleaders in politics and religion who exploit those fears to maintain control. That's the far-right agenda in a nutshell. I pity the folks who buy into it, hunkering down in their ideological or theological foxholes while life passes them by. Palmer continues with this, quote, memo to self. Keep leaning into life until you can't. Live each moment as if there will be another and another, even though you know full well they won't go on forever. Everyone gets one wild, precious life.
And as some of you know, that one wild and precious life is a famous line from Mary Oliver. So anything that challenges our existential survival and rocks our boat feels like some, in the words of some translations of this verse, awful visitations and the arrival of great power. Challenging circumstances can help reset human expectations and return our livelihoods to align closer to nature's reality, for a little while anyway. But after each catastrophe that we survive, we return to status quo ante, how things have always been, back to a future of infrastructures and imaginations that are too hard set in the past, probably only because they are familiar. So we still build in low places and in fire-prone regions. We don't break habits of violence, and we approach challenges without wisdom, and thus with a fool's hope for change. Now, what do you think about the last few paragraphs that we've talked through, Alala? Do you have any ideas or expansions of this?
I love this invitation to change, catastrophe as an opening to the realm of possibility. And just the sense that we return to the status quo, that we don't break our learned habits or habitudes. When the cataclysm of my husband's death by suicide thrust me into a course of cascading, catastrophic change, it was my dedication to satyagraha, to holding tight to truth, that became a process not of returning to any kind of status quo, but of refounding my personhood. We'd been married for 42 years. There just wasn't an adult me that had existed before. So it was this practice of holding tight to truth that helped me reset my habits of thought and worldview. And there's another Irish mystic, I don't know if you're familiar with, the mystic and philosopher John Moriarty, who wrote something that describes really my experience of catastrophic nascence. And it's this. In the end, tectonic shock after tectonic shock having done the work, it was through a breach as big as herself in herself that she walked out into the first world. She would be a new past from which a new present and future would grow. Now, I've changed the pronouns because, of course, it was he, but that's John Moriarty from his Night Journey to Bodh Gaya.
Yeah. And that's going to remind our readers of our final poem coming up in a few minutes by Mary Oliver.
So, yeah, what it's this idea of returning to the status quo instead of refounding and remaking our psyche and our understanding of the world, I think is a wonderful, rich invitation here.
Now, here's a question to you. This is not pre-planned. But when you had to reorient yourself and refound yourself, did you find resources already within you that had always been there? Or did you have to graft something on and borrow things? And do you understand my question?
I think I do. What was already there was this dedication to truth. And as much as I learned about that through my study of nonviolence and Gandhi and his Satyagraha movement, it also emerged out of a childhood where I had a mother who taught her daughters to make their constant prayer, "Search my heart and try me, O Lord."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it's a practice, so I guess I didn't change that habit, of self-knowledge, of just looking at things. And so in the aftermath of that great catastrophe and this just explosion and disintegration of life and personhood, I went all the way back to what I could remember about myself to try to recover myself. And what I found was that a lot of who I thought I was based on narratives, stories about me that others had told that I was trying to live into. So I looked at those experiences, at those memories, and as you know, Mark, I practice law. I practice trademark and copyright law. So I'm familiar with this word deem. We use, if the something isn't submitted by 15 days, it will be deemed to have been something or other, right?
Yeah.
So what was happening as I retold these stories and re-examined what was true for me in those experiences, as opposed to the stories I'd been given about them, I was redeeming myself.
Okay. I like
That's the journey, and I'm still on it. It's been 5 years, so we're still working.
Yeah. One of the abiding questions I've had is, how do we reset ourselves? Of course, we can get catastrophes like a hurricane that will reset things. Everybody's had that call in the morning at 3 o'clock saying someone is in danger or is dying, and you instantly go into a whole different consciousness. And that's a reset. But I'm wondering, and I think Tao is all about this, to teach us that adjacent, there's that word, adjacent to us, is this fecund universe that is already ours. And we can reset our own clocks. We can reimagine our own calendars. We can redo this ourselves. And I think the spiritually mature person, no matter your faith, is one who knows how to self-interrupt their bullshit, their stuff. Okay? Yeah. Okay. So does that raise any thoughts for you?
It does. It reminds me of another thing that John Moriarty said in his book, Night Journey to Bodh Gaya, where he says, what we need is a culture in which we will become possible in ways wonderfully different from previous ways. So it's not just, I'm going to change my habit. I'm going to choose a different way of doing things. It's, I'm going to go all the way back and refound the ways I can become possible. And in that Poetics of Possibility, John talks about how we make memory from experience, and what we hold in memory impacts what we think is possible. So for me, it was going back into the memories, reviewing them, redeeming, and then finding myself with a new past, in a new present, with a whole new way of becoming possible.
John O'Donohue, on his very wonderful interview on the Krista Tippett show, it was called Speaking of Faith back then, but it's now called Own Being. But please go back and listen to the unedited one. And in that hour and a half, he talks at one time about never go around without something beautiful in your mind. And I think that is your adjacent fecund, that thing, that because that thing can be the filter through which everything else comes in. And I think having something beautiful in your mind or your heart is a great way to live. And then you may not be so beholden to the fear and the past.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Mark.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Class, this verse prompts me to advocate the following. Let us learn what Ursula K. Le Guin calls in her translation the right fear, which is a good, non-paralyzing caution about how one might not do the right thing. Healthy respect, or the good fear, can prevent the repeating of the same old mistakes that have pretty much landed us right where we are. The right fear arises when you see injustice and want to be part of its resolution. The right fear is doing something for your community because it's the right thing to do, and perhaps no one else is doing it. The right fear can be enabling your kids to be strong, independent human beings, because we see examples all the time of kids not being enabled to be who they are born to be. The right fear leads to a curious investigation into what can be put into place. This is right action, at the right time, for the right reason, or in shorthand, Wu Wei.
Shun Ryu Suzuki Roshi says, the secret of Soto Zen is just 3 words. Not always so. If you understand things in this way, without being caught by words or rules, without too much of a preconceived idea, then you can actually do something. I just want to say this idea of right fear is, I think, where you stand when you're dwelling in possibility instead of reactivity.
Yeah.
And I think of it as an intrepid trepidation.
Okay. Very nice, yeah. So how do we get to Shunryu Suzuki Roshi's not always so mentality? Tao and its freedom are always there. Beneath the crap, or whatever surrounding, whatever condition in which you live, freedom and its power are not vanquished, but live and are available 24/7, 365. Yeah, shall we take things seriously? Yes, but take yourself lightly. The oppressions of this world do not need to be internalized, right? We don't want to become some dried out, brittle version of ourselves, right?
Fear is the lock and laughter is the key to your heart. Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Sweet, Judy Blue Eyes.
Final thought before we conclude. What has saved me again and again is the disciplined action of unselfing, practicing Wu Wei and retiring our tired, fearful selves as early as possible. So, wake up to others. Wake up to one's connections. Wake up to struggles that occur all around us. Wake up to that adjacent fecundity always nearby. Just notice the full moon every month for its own sake, not to photograph and post on social media. Regard the cardinal singing in the tree outside my window as your very self. See the world's 10,000 things as oneself. We can dissolve ourselves into something great, like every time you sit alone in a forest. Unselfing is surrender to the wonder and reality of the world around us, rather than yet one more day surrounding self with self. Unself thyself. The self is a blanket that does not warm. This episode I've called CTRL-ALT-DEL, a keyboard command for Windows-based computers to reboot a stuck computer. Likewise, we can get stuck, can I get a witness? Stuck by fear. So I hope that we can find the CTRL-ALT-DEL commands or keys within us to get things flowing again. This poem by Mary Oliver reminds me both of this verse and this episode's title.
The Journey. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried.
But you did not stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones.
But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. Mary Oliver.
Finally, our custom is to present a family-friendly version of verse 72, called here, No Fear, More Fun. When you're not scared, life feels like a big adventure. Don't mess with people's lives or take away their freedom. Be kind, and you'll stop weeds like fear and anger from growing. Letting go of fear, the wise live naturally in wonder, not to show off, but to care for the world. They don't grab too much. They focus on the one big thing that matters. Alala, thank you so much for being here. This has been rich. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it very much, Mark. Thank you for the opportunity. This has been grand.
Okay. And to the class, thank you for joining me this week. Our podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many, whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching is good news for today. Tao still speaks, as I think this verse really demonstrates. Thank you to Alala Linda for your wonderful voice and calming presence. Thank you, Audrey Davis, for your artwork. Thank you, Molly Hartwell, for your song, Put Your Roots Down. Thanks to you for your attendance in our pod class on Taoism. Fortress Press holds the copyright for quotations from my Tao Te Ching translation. May your days begin in the peace of being fearless, to bring hope to those who need it nearby us.